Alrighty guys, so we are in now unit 7, okay? Some of this is going to be review, some of this is going to be new for this lesson. I created a new folder on Schoology for this unit, okay? I also, I'm going to be, just like I usually am, posting everything that I'm going to be doing, the notes and everything. So you'll see at the top of Schoology, there's a Digital Learning, Unit 7, okay, folder. And in there will be the homework sheet that will tell you what's going on. There will also be a detailed answer key. And it's going to be broken up day by day, saying day 1, day 2, day 3. So right now I think there's a few assignments in there, so you can check your answers against that if you have questions. And then I'll be posting the notes, okay, as well as this video, okay? Just like I've been doing, all right? So this is day 1. We're doing section 7.1 in the textbook, and it actually happens to be worksheet 7-1, all right? So if you remember, we've done this before, okay? What you guys have to remember is that if we have a fractional exponent, what that really means is that is a radical just written in exponential form, okay? So whenever you do this, right, you're going to remember that like some number, right, to the power, right? There's going to be a power here, okay? And that power can be outside, okay, or it can be underneath, all right? But that's our power. And then the number here is going to be our, what's called index, if you remember, all right? So that can be rewritten as a fractional exponent as power over index. Okay, so if I give you 40 to the 3/4 power in radical notation, what that means is 40, right? This is my power, that's my index. So you can write the 3 either here, right, inside, okay, with the 4 as the index, or you can also sometimes see it as 4, the 4th root, if you remember, that's how we say it, of 40 raised to the 3rd power. Those mean the same thing. It doesn't matter to me how you write it, okay? But you should know that they mean the same thing, okay? The other thing I want to mention about this one is you don't see a power. So if you don't see a power, that means it's to the 1st power. So that means this will be 16 to the 1/4 power, right? Because that's my power, then my index becomes the denominator of my fractional exponent. So it's 16 to the 1/4, all right? Now, when we put this in our calculator, all right, the radical notation, what you have to remember to use that, all right, and to change the index, if you're doing the square root of something, that implies that you're using an index of 2, okay? We're going to be using an index of 4 possibly, or 3, okay? So you're going to have to change the index. So the way you're going to do that, all right, is you're going to type 4, then hit math, okay? So we're going to go into our calculator and hit math. And then if you look, they have one. Choice number 4 is when the index is 3 automatically, or you can change the index to any number you want. So here we want the index to be 4, so I typed in 4. Then I'm going to choose number 5. Now, if you have a fancier calculator, unlike me, that 4 will become a superscript and become the index, okay? For me, it just says 4 is the index and takes the place of that x, all right? And then we're going to do 40, right? And then raise to the 3rd power. For me, I have a caret. It might look like a superscript. And then we hit enter and we get to the nearest tenth. This should be 15.9, okay? So math we're going to use in our calculator, and then number 5, which is going to be x, right? And you always want to put type index first, okay? All right, so we have that. Then this guy, right, we want the 4th root, or the index is 4, right? Then I'm going to hit math, choose number 5, right? Oh, I forgot to put my number in there, 16. And that gives me 2, okay? And that's because when you're doing the 4th root of something, you're thinking to yourself, what number multiplied by itself, when you evaluate it, Okay, that's what I mean by that. You find its value. What number multiplied by itself 4 times, that's why there's an index 4, will give you 16, all right? Now, you can also put this in your calculator as well if you don't want to put it in radical form. They mean the same thing. What I would say is if you have an older calculator like me and you have to use the caret button and it doesn't look like a superscript, then you have to put that fraction in parentheses. But you will see it gives you the same answer. So the calculator understands either form, okay? So again, just to repeat what I was just saying, if you want to write this guy, it's 216, right? This is my power, that's my index, so I'm going to put a 1 there. You don't have to show that. And then here you have to put a little superscript of 3. It should not look like a coefficient of 3. So what I should not see is this. Okay, that 3 has to be a superscript, okay? If this index is a 2, you don't have to show it, all right? Just like we're used to when we use square roots. So now, if I want the cube root, I can just hit math and go to number 4. Do you see how that's a cube root right there? So it automatically makes it a superscript. Then I put the 216, and I get 6, right? So that means 6 times 6 times 6 gives me 216, all right? Changing this guy, right, would be, right, I have a power of 1, so this would be 100 to the 1/3 power, okay, with an exponent of 1/3. And then if I put this in my calculator, again, you can put it in the fraction form, exponential form with the fraction, or you can do a radical form. So I'm just going to put the 1/3 power, and that gives me 4.6 to the nearest 10th, right, 1 decimal place. Then this guy is 125. Remember, this is power. This is my index. All right, so that's what you should be thinking. So when I write this, power over index, and then I can put this in my calculator or that in my calculator. It doesn't matter. I know this is going to be 25, and I'll tell you why. Because if you look, the 3rd root of 125 is 5, because 5 times 5 times 5 is 125, and you can do that on your calculator too. And then if I take that evaluated answer and I square it, that will give me 25. Now you can also check it on the calculator, 125 raised to the 2/3 power, and there's your 25, okay? But that's what the calculator is doing. And then 150 raised to the power over index, 3/4 power. Okay, and then I put this in my calculator. Oops, just kidding. Put that in my calculator, so I'll do it in radical form. So I'm going to put the 4 as the index, hit math, go to 5, right? Put 150, and then raise that to the 3rd power. And there you go, 42.9. Okay, so those are our answers, okay? Again, I'll post these notes so you can use them. All right, now, what we're going to start to see here is there's going to be not just an exponent of 2. The exponents are going to change. Sometimes they're going to be fractions, okay? Sometimes they're going to be the 3rd to the 4th, okay? We have solved this. This is a quadratic, okay? So you know there should be 2 solutions generally, okay? Generally, like 99% of the time there's 2 answers, okay? Now if I look at this one, all right, I'm gonna solve it just like I normally would for an x, okay? It just happens to be an x squared. So I'm going to isolate the x squared, so get that by itself. So if you think about it, if this was, for example, right? You guys have been doing this for a while. If I just get rid of the squared, 2x minus 4 equals 28, right? You guys would do plus 4, right? And then divide by 2. Right, so that would give you 32, and then you divide by 2, and you get x is 16. I'm going to do exactly the same thing here. So I'm going to isolate this x squared. So you always do the addition or subtraction first, right? We got 2x squared equals 32. Divide by 2, just like I did before. And then the only additional step is, like we've done before, is we have to square root that, right? And do the opposite of squaring, which is square rooting. So therefore your answer is x equals, and this is the big thing that you have to remember that I'm going to be stressing today is you need the plus or minus 4, because if, right, the answer here, x squared, that quantity, has to equal 16. Well, if I square a positive 4, I get 16. But if I also square a negative 4, I get 16. So there's actually 2 answers to this, okay? So what you're going to see today is we're going to talk about solving equations more next class, okay? But the deal here is I just want you to know when to have 2 solutions versus 1. So let me show you what I mean by that, okay? So if you look, here's N and here's A, okay? This N and A, it's a little confusing the way the book does it, okay? So when we have our notation, N is going to be your index. So that's what N is, okay? Then A is the number under the radical, okay? So that's going to be A. So if you take a look here, what they're saying to you is if N is odd, okay, and it's any real number, it can be literally anything, okay, there will always be one solution, okay? So the cube root of 8 is 2, okay? The cube root of -1, right, is -1, because -1 times -1 times -1 is -1. So they're cube rooting these. Now, notice, we're used to the fact that you can't square root a negative number. Well, that's true, okay? But if you're cube rooting, if you have a negative times a negative times a negative, well, negative times negative becomes positive, and then we get another negative. So we can cube root a negative number, okay? So when you have an odd index, okay, so remember, this is your index, there will always be one solution. That's the big thing I want you to take away from this, okay, today? So, important, okay? If the index is odd, then there's one answer, or root is another word that they use, okay? One answer, and it's always the same sign. So what I mean by that is, do you see how I took the cube root of 8? Well, since this is odd, I know there's one answer, right? And this, since this is positive, then that will be positive, okay? The cube root of -1, since it's odd, I can take the cube root of it, okay? And since this is -1, I know this will be a negative answer here. So if this is negative, my answer is negative. This is positive underneath the radical, then my answer is positive, okay? Now, it gets a bit dicey with even, okay? If you have an even index, okay, and that's what this chart is telling you, and the number is greater than 0, basically it's positive, okay? So the number underneath the radical, remember that's A. So if that's positive, you have 2 solutions, right? Because if you remember, right, whenever we square root, right? So think about a square root, that's an even index, right? So whenever we square root, there's actually 2 answers to that, right? There's a positive and a negative. So it's the same thing with a 4th root, with a 6th root. Any even one, it's going to be a positive and a negative, okay? Now, if the number underneath the radical is 0, then the answer is 1. There's only one of them because there's no such thing as a plus or minus 0, okay? So it's just one answer, okay? Then less than 0, aka negative. So if I take the square root or an even index, okay, of a negative number, then there's no answer, okay? So no real answer, so none, okay? The big thing here is if the index is even, then generally most of the time there's going to be 2 answers, plus or minus, okay? And the other thing is you can't have a negative number under the radical, okay? When it's an even index. So it's all about even and odd, okay? So on your homework, you're gonna see, find the indicated nth root, just the answers, okay? So the answers, because we're gonna be using this to solve equations next class, okay? So remember, this is just n and a. So the third root, or the cube root of negative 64. Now, I'm thinking to myself, oof, it's a negative number underneath the radical, can't have that. But this is odd, right? So that's okay. If this is odd, that tells me negatives are okay, and I'm going to have a negative answer, okay? So if I take the third root of negative 64, right, that means what number multiplied by itself 3 times will give me 64? Well, that would be 4 times 4 times 4, but since this is negative, it will be negative 4, okay? Now, you will always have a calculator, okay, so you can put this in. Or we just talked about how to put it in the calculator. You just have to hit math, enter, negative 64, right? So I just chose number 4 because the third, the index of 3 was already there. And I hit enter, and it gives me the answer, negative 4, okay? Now, SAT-wise and things like that, they wouldn't give you a calculator, so I would just know that that should have one solution, and it should be a negative, okay? Now, the next guy, remember n is our index, so the fourth root, that's how you say that, of 81. So what number multiplied by itself 4 times will give me 81, right? So since this is even, right, I know there should be 2 solutions, okay, for the roots. So if I put this in the calculator, right, and I do 4, and then I hit math, and I go to number 5, okay, let me move that so you guys can see it. Hit enter. All right, so the fourth root of 81, my calculator tells me 3, right, which is great. But if we're talking about the roots and the solutions, we need to include the plus or minus because this is an even index, okay, just like if we square rooted. So big thing, right, again, if the index is even, there's 2 answers with a plus or minus, all right? Now, if you guys want to practice, you can hit pause right now and try the next 3. Okay, I'm going to do them right now. Okay, so if you want, press pause. So, indicated nth root, or another way for that is solution. Okay, so we're solving here. So, the square root, so the index is 2, I don't have to show that, of 144. That number's on always the a value. So the square root of 144 is 12. But because this is an even index, I'm going to put plus or minus, okay? Number 2, index is 3. So the cube root, or the third root is how you say it, of 100, right? 1,000, I should say, is going to be, if I put this in my calculator, it's going to give me a 10, okay? Now I don't have to do the plus or minus again because this is odd. So again, odd, 1 solution, or 0, or root, okay? This guy is going to have the fourth root of 256. Now again, if I put this in my calculator and hit math and go to number 5 and put 256, because you might not know the answer to this, it's going to give me a 4, right? But again, this is an even index, so I know there are 2 solutions. Okay, that's a big thing I want you to take away from this. So this should be a plus or minus 4, all right? So this is part of the homework, right? Rewriting, okay, evaluating, putting in your calculator, and then we're not going to solve. I just wanted to review that with you because that's where we're going. And then the big thing here on this page is, remember, if it's an odd index, there's 1 answer. If it's an even index, then there are 2 solutions or roots, and you need to incorporate the plus or minus, all right? Hopefully that makes sense, and I will hopefully talk to you guys soon.